W tripled their market share in a single year. HP Enterprise grew revenue by 168% across 72 countries. DHL added 22% of revenue. One methodology was behind every single one of those results, and it has a 33-year track record across more than 1,000 organizations, large multinationals to fast-growing startups without a single failure. Almost no one in the United States has heard of it. Today's guest is Hugo van den Biggelaar. He spent 8
Perfect.
years at Nike, walked away from one of the most coveted brand roles in the world, moved to Brooklyn, and is now on a mission to bring this methodology called Bitsing to American founders. His core argument is short, uncomfortable, and I think it applies to almost every B2B company you can name. Most companies aren't doing the wrong things, they're doing the right things in the wrong order at the wrong moment. And that single distinction, he says, is where growth quietly dies. Today, we're unpacking exactly what that means, how to diagnose it in your own business, and what the methodology is that guarantees growth and actually what it actually requires of you. So let's get into it. Hugo van den Biggelaar, you're the founder
Yes.
of the Bitsing Company USA, bringing growth methodology to the US that's been proven across more than 1,000 organizations, including the likes of BMW, Shell, HP, and KLM, as well as startups and scale-ups across Europe over 33 years. Before this, you led brand strategy at Nike for 8 years, including global programs like Nike Soccer across the EMEA. You've also built an NGO from scratch that's still running today and
Mhm.
co-owns 2 restaurants in Amsterdam. You're now Brooklyn-based, building Bitsing in the US, one company at a time. And Hugo has a very specific view on why most B2B growth strategies are dead before they start. Hugo, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast. You said something that stuck with me. And most
Okay.
companies aren't doing the wrong things, they're doing the right things in the wrong order at the wrong moment. That's not a small distinction. What does wrong order actually mean in practice, and why is it so hard to spot when you're the one inside of it?
That's a great question. And thanks for the beautiful introduction. I
No
gladly
worries.
am a part of this show. So thank you so much for the warm introduction. So to answer your question, what I would love to explain is the following. So when it comes to about talking about the wrong order, what I mean by that is simple. If you think about companies and organizations that are engineering for growth, whether that is through new product categories, whether that is through optimizing their funnel, they often tend to optimize for a specific part of their company, right? So they say, oh, we need to, like I said, optimize our top funnel, or our retention is down, so we need to optimize for loyalty. Now, what we say at Bitsing, why that is the wrong order, why that is the wrong thing to do, is that we believe there is a set series of steps we have to take to be able to determine what are we optimizing for, with what type of investment, and in what time. So at Bitsing, we always start, for example, with a financial goal, because through financial goal setting, we actually know what our North Star is. Through financial goal setting and knowing what our North Star is, we then can start to derive strategies. So who are we focusing on? What markets are we focusing on? What regions are we focusing on? You name it. Now, once we have derived those strategies, then we can start to think about how do we market towards these regions or people. What are we marketing? What does our funnel look like? So when I say when people are doing the right thing in the wrong order, what I mean by that is that they immediately feel like if they're optimizing for growth, they have to think very detailed, but as a result, they kind of forget about the bigger picture. And you first have to have a very clear understanding of what the bigger picture is before you start to dive into things like optimizing your top funnel or, for example, your retention.
That makes sense. Let's make this real if we can. Take me through the last time you sat with a founder, and within the first 20 minutes, you could already see exactly where the sequencing had broken down. Could you tell us what you saw and what were they convinced the problem was instead?
Yeah, so for example, I was sitting with a founder last week, and I run something I call an inspiration session where I'll take you through the methodology of Bitsing, the 7 principles it entails, and how it applies to your company. So we were doing this inspiration session, and what I noticed is that it's an American company, and they wanted to expand into different markets. So what they were doing is they said, okay, we've seen some potential in a certain market, so now we're going all in on that market. So they were building an office there, and when I started digging into what all in meant for them, and asked them what their goal settings was, or for example, what justified the investment in this new region, this new market. What turned out is that, first of all, at Bitsing, we believe it should be financial goals, but the goal setting actually was not financial. So they were just aiming for a certain amount of new clients, for example. So as a result, if you're not setting financial goals, you start to confuse things with strategy and goals. And as a result, you might be able to hit your goals, in this case, a certain set of new clients, but still financially don't have a viable business, right? Because not every client is actually a financially viable client. So that was one thing I saw. Also, what I found is in Bitsing, we have in the second principle something we call the pencil method, where we look at your financial data and we decide based on that financial data and some of the modeling we do, what should be your focus areas when it comes to optimizing for growth, and how much you should over-index in certain areas, and how little you should over-index or under-index in other areas. And what you tend to see as humans, that we have this bias where if something is new, we always think, oh, we have to put all our weight behind it. We have to put all our marketing budget behind it. We have to put all our sales budget behind it. However, if that only represents, let's say, 10% of your business, you're starting to lose out on the things that are actually your bread and butter, the things that we call the areas that cause for continuity. So in this very brief conversation I've had with this founder, what I already noticed is that there are some of these traps that we tend to fall into as human beings, and that the Bitsing method in this case would have been or is a great fit for this company, because it will help them to calibrate some of the decisions they have been making.
I wonder if you could get a little bit more granular.
Of course.
The core focus should be a financial goal.
Yeah.
With the Bitsing method. Now, in this particular instance, the company had new logos that they wanted to acquire, etc. I'm curious, is there a problem in just creating a revenue goal for the sake of revenue goal, if it's not tied into perhaps more deeper and intrinsic values? And how is that in any way different from someone who says, I would like to acquire new logos, which would result in X amount of new revenue coming in, which would also be a financial goal?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. We truly do believe that having a financial goal is key, because financial goals create clarity, they force choices, and they create accountability. So what we believe, if you don't have a financial goal, or if the company, because that is what I see often as well, when people in the company might not be aware of the financial goals of the company, it becomes very hard to make the right decisions. Or sometimes you can be successful. I've worked with a company that had brand awareness as a goal, and they were very successful in achieving brand awareness, but in the end didn't sell anything. So what we believe is that it's important to have those financial goals so that we can translate them in strategies like brand awareness, like having a certain amount of clients, so that at the end of the day, we are still trying to grow this company, and we are making sure that if we hit our goals, we actually have a reason to exist the next year. So that's why financial goals are important, and that's why it's important from those financial goals to derive the right strategies and to have the right focus on the right things with the right amount of investment and time. Now, what we do as well, and that's also something that I saw from another session, which might be interesting to mention, is in principle 3 from the Bitsing methodology, we talk about something we call the golden egg. And the golden egg is basically the reason why a company should choose for you over your competitors. Now, why do we call that the golden egg? Because we have a metaphor where we have two parrots sitting next to one another. And those parrots, as the saying goes, they parrot each other, right? So basically what we're showcasing is that a lot of brands tend to say the same things. And we all say we have the best product, or we say we are the fastest, we are the cheapest, you name it. So what we'll help companies with is finding the thing that no one else can claim. The golden egg, the uncopyable advantage that you have over all your competitors. And every brand on earth has one. You just have to know what you're looking for. especially when it comes to B2B, what we see is often when people think about that, they tend to choose something that is rational. Huh? So they tend to choose like things like I was mentioning, we have the best product or we are the cheapest. They tend to talk about product. They tend to talk about a rational reason to choose for the brand. However, at Bitsing, we say that preference comes through an emotional reason. The example I love to give, for example, is Tesla, right? So Tesla's product objectively has not changed. The price has not changed, but the sales have plummeted. Why is that? Because no one has preference for that brand anymore. So through preference comes growth. And how do we create preference? By creating an emotional reason for you to choose for my organization. So we'll help you with the golden egg. And what I see very often, specifically when I talk to B2B, specifically when I talk to SaaS, to tech, to AI founders, is that they tend to choose to market themselves as based on a rational reason. So to any founder out there, I would highly recommend thinking about what is this emotional reason that I want to put in front of my potential clients so that I create preference that no one else can claim except for me.
What would be the constraints or parameters within which you would recommend people create their financial goals? Because I'm assuming it's not just something you want to pull out of your hat, so to speak, or just go off of past numbers.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. We say that we should have 3 financial goals. So the first one is something we call the continuity goal. And the continuity goal is basically your break-even goal. So how much revenue do I have to earn in 12 months to ensure that after 12 months, I'm still alive, right? I can pay all my bills. I don't have to fire anyone. I can pay my rent, you name it. So obviously that is not what we strive for, but it is important to have that as a baseline. So to any founder out there, and I've had many conversations already where people actually don't necessarily know how much they have to earn to ensure that they can pay their bills next year. I would definitely recommend doing the math and figuring out what is my baseline. After that, what we do with Bitsing is we set up an ambition goal. So that is a revenue goal that is within reach, but definitely is ambitious. It's not something you can easily achieve, but it is something that is achievable within the realm of reality. Now, the third goal that we set, because it does happen often, or at least it does happen multiple times, is that people reach it, is the dream goal. So what is your actual dream goal? If all things go well, if everything falls into place, what is the dream goal that we set for ourselves? So those are the parameters that we set for that we have for the financial goal setting.
So those goals, continuity, ambition, and dream, that sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But in our previous conversation, I remember you told me something surprising. When you sit down with a sales or a marketing team at a company that's been around for years, they don't often know what financial goal they're working towards.
Exactly.
How widespread would you say is that problem, and what does it actually cost the company when the CEO knows the number, but the team doesn't?
Yeah, so I was already alluding it to earlier, but indeed, so one thing why we say financial goals are important, right, is because they help force the right decisions and they create accountability and clarity. So we believe it's very important that the entire organization knows what the North Star is that they're working against, because without that knowledge, there is a lack of accountability, for example. And I know from a lot of companies, for example, when it comes to marketing, a marketeer gets a certain budget for the season and they have to spend it. So that is their goal. I have to spend a certain amount of $1 million, for example. But very often, that amount of dollars is not necessarily linked towards the financial goal setting. So the marketeer just knows how much to spend, but not necessarily how much to earn with that spend. And as a result, it starts to feel a little bit like you're walking into a casino. So I'm in Vegas. If I have, let's say, 2 million chips in my pocket, we walk to the roulette. I don't know whether I'm going to walk away with 10 million chips in my pocket, 0, 1. And that's kind of how it feels and what happens if, as a marketeer, as a salesperson, you don't necessarily know what the work that you're doing needs to live up to, right? So that's why it's, for us, incredibly important once we set those 3 goals that everyone in the company is aware of those 3 goals so that we all feel like we're working towards the same goal and we feel accountability and responsibility for the choices that we make.
So in one of your engagements, if we could walk through that scenario, could you walk us through what that looks like in the room? What does a sales team say when you ask them about their financial goals?
Yeah. So, for example, I asked them about their financial goals, and I asked them what is, for example, I said, hey, when I go through this inspiration session, literally one of the very first things we discuss, obviously, is principle one. We have to set a continuity goal as objective. So, when I asked that question and I was like, what is your continuity goal? The response was, I don't know. We don't know. You have to ask the CEO. So that is a very clear example of a lack of knowledge, and that is not to point fingers at anyone, but that is definitely something in our philosophy that we should prevent.
Would you say in some, if not most instances, it is the CEO's failure to communicate, or is it the team's failure to ask?
I wouldn't say failure might be a very harsh word to use, but I do feel that there is accountability on both ends, right? Because if there is a certain culture where, as a founder, as a leader, or as a C-suite person, you haven't managed to convey the dreams and the aspirations of your company, at least from a financial point, towards the rest of the team, then that's definitely something that I think you should be addressing and you should be adjusting. Now, on the other hand, and that depends a little bit on the size of the company as well, sometimes you can feel like a small radar in a very big machine. So then you might lose the interest around what you're actually trying to achieve versus just focusing on the task ahead of you. I would say it's not necessarily a failure or like someone is responsible for that, but I definitely think that the corporate culture around that or the organizational culture should be addressed and changed on both ends.
So you're very firm about financial goals only, no brand awareness goals, no engagement targets, no market share, but for
So let me, can I
sure,
interrupt there? Yeah, because
sure,
I don't think we should not focus on brand awareness, right? Like
okay,
one of the key funnel metrics that we use in Bitsing is brand awareness. It's like one of the like the
okay,
B from Bitsing literally means brand awareness. So
oh,
I'm not
okay,
saying we shouldn't be focusing on that. What I
yeah,
am saying is that you should have financial goals, and underneath that we should derive certain strategies, and those strategies obviously need to be measured. For example,
okay,
brand awareness is a strategy that we need to measure. The I from Bitsing stands for interest, so for brand preference. So we need to measure. There's a difference between brand awareness and having preference for a brand. We need to be measuring how many people actually have preference for a brand, that want our brand. So I'm not saying those strategies should not be measured or they're wrong. I'm just saying there is a difference between having a goal and having a strategy. And
okay.
that's where people get confused. A goal is where we want to go, and a strategy is how we get there.
Because I was thinking that most B2B marketing teams would have those sorts of metrics that I was just talking about baked into their scorecard. And I was wondering, how do you explain to someone that they can technically hit their goal and still go bankrupt? And what does it cost to run a team that's rowing toward the wrong thing?
Yeah. So how I explain it is if I go through my session, I sit down with these teams, with founders, with sales team, BDR teams, what you name it. I explain actually every principle through the lens of an example, a real life example that we either have witnessed within a professional landscape or an example of actually clients that we worked with. And the way that I explain the mixing of strategy and goal setting is actually through the real life example of a Dutch insurance company. And I was kind of alluding to that a little bit earlier as well, that as goal setting set brand awareness. So they wanted to make sure that everyone in the Netherlands was aware of this insurance company. Now, at the end of the year, we can definitely say that this team was able to pop champagne because they were on billboards, they were on radios, they were on video commercials, they were in podcasts, you name it. They spent millions and millions on brand awareness, and I'm pretty sure they actually exceeded their goals because I don't think there's a person in the Netherlands that has not heard of this company by now. However, the one thing that they had, the one big issue, is they didn't sell any policies. They hit their goal as they thought it was their main goal, but then in the end they didn't have revenue. What is the purpose of hitting a goal if you don't earn money with it? So that's why we say a goal needs to be financial. The strategies underneath obviously need vary depending on where you are as a company, where you are as an organization, what the type of products is, the market you want to enter. And with Bitsing, we'll help you to set those financial goals. We'll help you to understand where you need to focus your strategies on. And then we'll help you with certain marketing tactics like the golden egg. And we'll help you to optimize for your funnel through the lens of marketing programs as well as sales programs.
I'm curious, for a CMO
Yeah.
that is very much caught up in this idea of brand awareness feeds pipeline eventually,
Yeah.
how would you go about helping him or her change their perspective. Bitsing approach.
Yeah. So what we do actually when it comes, you mean specifically like the marketing tactics that a person should be applying, or?
That would be more of a practical outcome, but
Yeah.
for someone like the CMO who runs pretty much the entire marketing
Yeah.
department, I think more of a perspective shift is required first off, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
before they can actually effectively implement the tactics and strategies.
Yeah, so the way we approach, like in that sense, we have a cookie cutter approach. We have a very set methodology that is industry agnostic, it's size agnostic, it's B2B or B2C agnostic. It doesn't really matter necessarily. It works for everyone. But how we go about it is normally I sit down with the founders, the C-suite, so in this case, including the CMO. I show them the Bitsing inspiration session where we go through these 7 principles, how it applies to their company. And I haven't had, to be fairly honest, since I'm on this journey in the US, I haven't had any negative reaction or any uninterested reaction yet. So once you showcase the simplicity, but the importance of the sequence of these 7 principles and how it applies to their particular organization, everyone normally is very excited about it, whether it's the CMO, the COO, the CRO, or the CEO. So I wouldn't say there's a specific approach that I would be applying differently for a CMO, for example, a COO. The truth is that Bitsing as a methodology is all encompassing, sorry. And as a result, the entire organization needs to rally behind it. So it is important that everyone is on board. This is not a sales methodology or a marketing methodology. The entire organization needs to rally behind it, believe in it, and execute it properly. And as a result, therefore, I have not a particular approach for a CMO versus a CEO, because everyone needs to be on board with the same methodology.
You talked about the pencil method earlier on,
Yeah.
wherein you analyze revenue streams and focus on what's actually working. Now, in our previous conversation, you shared an example of an AI company pouring budget into a product category that generated 5% of their revenue, while the thing generating 50% was on autopilot.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do they not see that? And what does the pencil method reveal that standard financial reporting doesn't?
Yeah, it's a great question, honestly. I ponder about that myself as well. But basically, it's tied to our second principle. The pencil method is the model we developed for the second principle, which is focus on the facts. So we should stop thinking, we should stop listening to our gut feeling, and we should throw our assumptions out of the window. Just focus on the facts that we have in front of us. And that sounds like something very simple. Like I said, the Bitsing methodology itself doesn't sound like rocket science if you go by the principles one by one. However, more often than not, we see that people actually tend to do listen to their gut feeling. They tend to do focus on certain assumptions they have. And actually, an example that I would love to share with your listeners and with you, which I think is the most clear example possible of how companies tend to make certain decisions that in the end don't seem very logical, but initially it does seem like that, is a client that we work with that is a toy store chain in the Netherlands. Now, we went through their financial data, and we also do always an extensive survey, and it turned out that 100% of their marketing budget was spent on kids. Now, that doesn't seem necessarily like a foolish thought, right? Like we're selling toys here. However, when we look at the revenue data, and in Bitsing we always say where your revenue is coming from, what your money source is, that's where growth is proven. It turned out, also not surprisingly, that kids was 0% of their revenue. So they were spending all their marketing budget on a cohort that was not spending a single dollar of their revenue. Now, obviously, they are influencers. I'm not going to deny that fact. But at Bitsing, we say it's a gamble to focus on the influencers, but it's a solid decision to focus on the people that bring in the money. Now, once we asked the team, like, hey, we actually see that you're spending a lot of money on a cohort that's not spending a single dollar with you. Who do you think actually your most important cohort might be? And they said moms, because kids get influenced by moms. That's what their thinking process was. However, it turns out that mom was only 7% of their revenue. Now, it turned out that fathers, in this particular case, was 82% of their revenue, but not a single marketing dollar, not a single sales dollar was being spent on fathers. Now, the way we apply this pencil method, and to explain for your listeners why it's called the pencil method, is because you have a pencil without a point, and you have a pencil with a very sharp point, And we always ask, okay, which pencil do you normally draw with? Everyone says a sharp point, but it turns out in the data, they tend to draw their strategy with pencils without a point. And basically what we said is, okay, there's 27 ways we apply this. So we look at product category, audience, regions, sales channel, seasonality, you name it. And when we started to look at product category, we found another very interesting thing. Because what product was this toy store chain marketing predominantly? They said games, because they believed that kids love games. Turns out that games was maybe their fourth or their fifth pencil, but Legos actually was 64% of their revenue. But like you said, it was more like an always-on thing in their mind. They're like, we'll sell Legos either way. So what did we tell the team, amongst other things? We told them, you should be marketing most of your budget and time, and you should be investing most of your time and attention into marketing and Legos to fathers, because fathers was 82% of the revenue and Legos 64%. And what happened, they managed to, in a declining market, change their revenue from $30 million into $50 million in 1 year, simply by focusing on the facts.
I wonder that moment when you showed that data in the room, what happened? Because I would imagine that moment must have been uncomfortable for someone.
I don't know if it's uncomfortable. I think if anything, people are just, it's more like a aha moment. Whoa, it's more like amazement than it is shame, right? We worked with Schiphol Group, which is the Dutch airport, the biggest Dutch airport, one of the biggest of Europe. And we worked with their mall. So not necessarily to sell airplane standing places or whatever you call it, but we worked with the mall inside the airport. And they had a gut feeling that they needed to sell fashion, right? So they thought, oh, you're going on holiday, what you want to buy a little bit of fashion and whatnot. Turned out that actually perfumes was the majority of their revenue. So once we showed them data, we said, you should be investing in perfumes, and a lot of your store spaces should be focused on selling perfumes versus selling clothing. And I'm not kidding you, their revenue went up with 540% in 1 year. So focusing on the facts seems something that's pretty straightforward, but sometimes we're human beings. We're flawed. We think too much. We listen to our gut feeling too much. And then when the data is in front of you, it actually is a big aha moment. And then once you start to see the results of that aha moment, yeah, that's when the magic starts to happen.
So, what would you counsel founders or CEOs of companies to do when there's a propensity to trust their gut instinct or the new thing that's on their radar, so to speak? It's one thing to say, trust the facts only, but is there more to it than that you would share with such people?
Of course, yeah. So trusting the facts and looking at, we have 6 pencils to be precise. Looking at 6 pencils obviously is oversimplifying a little bit the work that we do. The methodology definitely has a more thorough, more in-depth financial model behind this than just that. But to be honest, like truth be told, without us, without our help, and without working with me or some of my partners, you can already learn a lot by actually looking at the facts. So it's a very simple advice. If you make instinctual decisions, just ask your finance team for once, hey, where does my revenue actually come from? And if you see that your revenue is coming from certain streams, make sure you don't neglect them when something new comes on the path, right? And when you start to diversify, for example, make sure you're doing the right thing. If you want to focus on a smaller pencil because you see growth opportunity there, make sure you're not over-index on it. I think Nike, I came from Nike. Nike is the best example, right? We saw the growth potential in digital, and no one was wrong for seeing that potential. It was definitely there. But we forgot about the fact that wholesale was making up for more than half of our revenue. And then a year later, once we betted everything on digital, we were surprised to see that digital was not making up for the loss we had in wholesale, right? So don't forget about your bread and butter. Make sure you keep focusing on that whilst also slowly, gradually over-indexing on areas where you see more potential. Because it is true, the thing that is making up the majority of your revenue today might not be the thing of tomorrow. The world changes, trends happen, people have different preferences. But you can't the world tends to go in pendulum swings, right? We see one thing and we're like, okay, let's go. I think that's the next thing now. World doesn't work like that. You need to grow gradually, and we'll help you to do that. And you can help yourself to do that as well.
Principle 3, you called it finding your golden egg, the emotional, non-copyable reason customers choose your brand over everyone else. You said that tech founders almost universally get this wrong. They lead with rational positioning, with the fastest, cheapest, the best integrated, etc. But someone listening to this podcast might push back saying B2B buyers are rational. They build business cases. Procurement runs RFPs on features and price. Why are they making emotional decisions even when they're convinced they're being rational?
So I would call it a myth bust. I say B2B is actually not rational. Because in the end, what we want to do is we want to be part of an organization. Very often, we want to be part of a brand. Very often, when I speak to a founder, they say, "Oh man, I've been losing on pricing lately." That just simply means that they don't have a preference for your organization, and that's when pricing suddenly does become important, right? Like an example I love to use is ChatGPT. ChatGPT was the best product in the market, and they marketed themselves as the best product in the market. And what happens? Claude comes along, and suddenly Claude is better. And the whole rational reason why I was choosing ChatGPT, the whole reason why they told me to choose ChatGPT, suddenly becomes invalid because they're not the best product anymore. So the risk you exposing yourself to as a B2B founder, if you tend to focus on the rationality of your product, or sorry, the rationality of your brand by focusing on, for example, product, is very high, because we live in a world where inevitably a competitor will come in, will be cheaper. And what happens? We will switch sides. We will choose the other brand because the whole reason why you told me to pick you has become invalid. And I will give you another example besides the Tesla one of a brand that is fantastic in creating preference. So it's the other side of the medal, so to say. Apple, right? Objectively, an iPhone is the most expensive phone there is. Objectively, an iPhone is not necessarily the best phone there is. Even more, 85% or something of an iPhone is made of Samsung parts. So why am I willing to pay a premium on the iPhone? Yes, when people say price is everything, that's not true. I'm willing to pay a premium on a phone that's objectively not better. That is because I want to be associated with the Apple. I want to be a part of that. And as a result, I will pick Apple, and I will be the idiot that pays a premium for a product that is not necessarily better. So they have managed to create an emotional relationship with me, and through that preference, we will always keep choosing them. Another example that I can give you from B2B to service your crowd as well is a company that we work with that's building airplanes in the Netherlands called Fokker. And Fokker built airplanes for over 100 years, went bankrupt, and decided to focus on maintenance. So they approached us and they said, how can we enter a market where British Airways, Lufthansa, for example, are so present, are so big, have big budgets, have existing relationships with Airbus and Boeing? How do we position ourselves in a market like that? So we did a whole workshop with them, and we managed to land on a golden egg. And what was the word they found? History. And not the factual part of history, no, the emotional weight that history carries, because they have been the only airplane service manufacturer that actually have been building airplanes for 100 years. They know the DNA of airplanes. So as a result, once we started to market around that word history, suddenly these engineers at Boeing and Airbus started to see and understand that the engineers and the maintenance crew at Fokker was their kin. There were people that actually understood airplanes. They've seen blueprints. They built airplanes from scratch. And now suddenly Lufthansa and British Airways are looking at Fokker, and Fokker creating a slogan around history, creating a marketing message around history, making sure that word history pops up everywhere. And looking at that and thinking, that is not a claim that we can make. Even if we wanted to, we cannot make it. And that is the definition of an uncopyable advantage. And that's how Fokker was actually able to create a foothold within this world, which was such a saturated market.
I love those examples, especially the ChatGPT and Claude example. So for a B2B SaaS founder, watching that play out and seeing themselves in it, what do they actually start to do Monday morning?
Can you elaborate on that question?
Sure. So for a B2B SaaS founder who's listening to that, watching this play out, and know that they're in that very same situation themselves, what do they need to start doing Monday morning that's different, that'll get them out of that space?
Yeah. I would say the first advice I can give you for this upcoming Monday morning then, think about how do I position myself, right? And we have things we call mode. There's the word USP, right? There's all these different terms that people tend to use. Think about, how do I position myself? And is that a rational reason? Can I measure it? Is it a thing that is measurable, like price is measurable? Quality might even be measurable. Or is it an unmeasurable thing? Is it more of an emotional reason? Can I say I am? Because that's what we say at Bitsing. Your golden egg has to be something where you can say I am, success factor X. So think about that, and once you came to the conclusion that it actually is a rational reason, think about the emotional reasons why a person would choose for your brand, your organization, so that you can start to kind of narrow down on those various reasons, and then you end up with that one particular reason that no one else can copy. Because there might be certain things that are very true for you. Let's say you are trustworthy, but your main competitor can make that same claim because they also never had any trust issues. Then it is a emotional reason that's true for you, but also for your competitor. And then obviously it doesn't become a golden egg reason. So work, and this I would say definitely the CMO has some work to do in this area then. Talking about what would I say to the CMO, one of their main responsibilities obviously is the branding positioning. So think about what makes us unbeatable and what makes me want to choose for my brand, while not talking about the product, because there is a separation there. What we say at Bitsing, you have to acknowledge that there's basically three major phases of where we are as a potential client or an actually existing consumer. We either want your brand, or we need to create that wanting. We need to buy your brand, and so we have to remove any friction when it comes to traffic, as well as when it comes to the actual sales moment. Or we need to stay with your brand, so we want to create loyalty. And the reality is that those phases require different messaging and different needs. But like I was explaining with the Tesla example, in our belief, preference is the most important thing you got to create. Because without preference, people won't buy and won't stay.
But that's an interesting point of view, because I would argue that in a lot of cases, while there is perhaps an underset expectation that branding responsibility or oversight resides with the marketing department, it often doesn't get a voice at the executive table. And more often than not, it just boils it down to things like colors, logos, etc. What you're describing is a lot more in depth and requires
Yes.
a deeper understanding of your customers' thinking. How would you encourage people to invest on that? Because it's something that, from what you're saying, it's something that needs to be invested in on a regular basis.
Yeah, yes, you're hitting the nail on the head. Like we're talking about, in the end, the core brand essence. Like it's the identity, it's literally the identity of your organization. And how we would go about it is, so if I do this golden egg workshop, as we call it, the funny thing is actually the input that comes from that golden egg workshop is not just from a C-level perspective. We work with teams where the concierge and the janitor actually also pitch in, because it is in the end also how they view the company. But the most important thing is that you don't think it through the lens of how a consumer sees you, but how you see yourself. So it has to come from your team and your company within, versus looking at external factors of how potential clients might see you, or certain sales reps, or for example, that you tend to work with, or agencies or whatnot. No, it really has to come from you internally.
Bitsing guarantees growth, and you say it in those words.
Yeah,
Most consultants and frameworks stay far away from that word.
I know.
You use
I
it
know.
with confidence.
I use
Walk
it
me
with
through.
confidence.
Walk me through what that guarantee actually means. What are the conditions on the client side?
Yeah.
What's your obligation? And has it ever genuinely been tested? Has anyone done everything right and still not grown?
Yes, that's a great question. So what I mean with guarantee is the following. When you perhaps work with other growth strategies or other consultants, even though I don't like to call myself necessarily consulting, because I believe we do much more than the average consultant that I have worked with in my professional career so far, is the following, right? So they apply certain methodology, maybe they give you a certain deck, they start to optimize for your loyalty program like I was referring to earlier. But what we do is we have an all-encompassing growth methodology that is not something I came up with. I wish I was that brilliant. It's not something I came up with just last year while sitting in my study room and thinking about life. No, it is a methodology that my mentor, my good friend Frans de Groot, came up with, basically 33 years ago when he had a marketing firm in the Netherlands and he worked with BMW. And BMW, in 1 year after applying his campaign, grew 300%, subsequently 163%. So they tripled their market share, were the fastest growing car brand of Europe, and everyone asked them, what happened? Now, Franz obviously had to answer that question and address it, and he's like, quite frankly, I don't necessarily know exactly what I've done. I've just intuitively done what I think we should be doing from a marketing perspective. After seeing that success, Franz sold his company and started digging into what has actually happened. What have I done? And he started to see a certain pattern, right? So he started to say, oh, wait, actually, this is the structure I applied. And from that, the Bitsing methodology slowly came into life. It was also not like it was thought from one day to the other. No, this methodology, and that's where slowly I'm getting to the guaranteed question, where this guaranteed comes from is it's been tested and trialed and further developed for over 33 years. He worked with multiple universities on it to strengthen the modeling behind it and so on. And most importantly, he has implemented it with over 1,000 organizations with an average year-on-year growth of 30%, with 18 outliers above 300%. And like I was mentioning, for example, Schiphol Group with 540% in 1 year. So where the guaranteed comes from is the fact that this immaculate track record kind of proves the case itself. And we were not afraid to share that track record. You can Google it online. We have blog posts about it. We have case studies online because it actually happens. The one note I do have to give is that when we say guaranteed and you actually decide to work with us, it doesn't come from just having the Bitsing goal plan. So the ideal trajectory that I love to work with companies is through a 3-phased approach where, I will first, together with your team and based on those financial data analysis, some surveys and so on, I built a Bitsing goal plan. Then phase 2 is about elaborating that plan, so setting up the right marketing approach and so on, building the calendar and everything. And then phase 3 is the execution, so the rollout. And in the beginning, I will be more involved, but by the end, your team should be trained enough so that basically, we always joke, you never have to see me again. So when we say guaranteed growth, it's basically twofold. So on the one hand, we have the case studies and the track record to prove it, because it never failed. It always worked. And, that creates like a crazy sort of adventure story of Franz. So another fun fact is, for example, he was in Cameroon 2 weeks ago. He sat down with the president, and Cameroon will be the first country on earth that's going to design and develop their economy through the lens of Bitsing. So that's going to be a very fun experiment to see how that plays out. And then on the other hand, the guaranteed comes from the fact that, we'll help you and train your team in the Bitsing mindset and in the methodology. So long answer to your question. That's what guaranteed comes from. Have we ever seen a Bitsing goal plan not being successful? Yes, we have. But that always comes from a failure in executing it properly. Because you can't cut corners. That's a very strict, rigid method of these 7 principles that you have to implement, all of them with the right investment, with the right things. Because if you try to cut corners somewhere, it might not work.
Did you ever see yourself offering a money-back version of this?
No, because obviously we thought about it, but it's also, for example, we thought about, hey, since the growth is so stellar, do we maybe say, hey, we just want a percentage of the growth? But the problem is with that, like I was explaining, the execution has to be done properly. So if a party doesn't execute it properly, that's not on us, but that might result in the growth not being as big as expected, or maybe not happening at all. And as a result, that is obviously not that's not on us. So that's also not something that should cost us money in that sense.
Cool. Okay. You said Bitsing isn't a sales method or a marketing method. The whole organization needs to do this thing together. Yeah. For a 30 to say 50% person B2B tech company, where marketing measures brand awareness, sales measures pipeline, and the CEO measures annual recurring revenue, how do you actually create alignment around one financial goal? What do you find breaks first, and what do you do when it does?
That's actually the beauty of it, because actually I spent most of my career at Nike, and that is one of the biggest corporations on earth. But what you see often at Nike, but also I've seen and heard from the experience of smaller B2B companies like you were just referring to, is actually that a lot of that misalignment comes from the fact, like you were explaining, that marketing is focused on this, sales is focused on that, finance is doing their own thing, and that is as relevant for a big corporation as for a smaller B2B SaaS tech company. And what the beauty of Bitsing is, and why actually some of the results I've seen and some of the conversations I've been having are so great, is that it offers a shared language. It offers a shared goal. So whereas, and I've worked in finance, I've worked in marketing, I've sit down in insights. So I know all these different hats that people are wearing and the troubles they have with communicating with one another simply because brains work differently or because language is missing. That's actually what Bitsing solves immediately at once. So instead of having that friction between those various companies because sales needs to focus on lead generation and marketing needs to focus on brand awareness, suddenly there's this one methodology that makes us all think in the same way, makes it all us measure in the same way, and makes us all talk in the same way. So if anything, what I've seen from my experience with Bitsing is that it doesn't make it harder, it actually solves for it.
And could you give us a specific conversation you've had when, say, a department head pushes back?
Yes, I can think of, yeah. So for example, one I had, but that was with a much bigger corporation, and I would say probably a lot of your listeners. But one conversation I had was with this company that set a $2 billion goal for themselves. So it's very big. And what they said, and that's also what I experienced at Nike myself, it's not necessarily something I think is wrong. But what they said is that they loved the inspiration session I hosted with them. And they saw, hey, we should be doing a lot of things a little bit different than we're doing right now. But the problem is at a corporation that big, it becomes hard to understand how you create a all-encompassing growth methodology versus being able to test it with, for example, a marketing team or a sales team. Now, the solution that we have been talking about is looking for a closed-off market, like a country or a certain business unit, perhaps, where you can influence finance, sales, marketing, etc., all at once. But I can imagine, and I know from my own personal experience once more, that it becomes hard for a company that big to think, how can we implement this at once? So that is like a pushback I've had. Another pushback, for example, I had is from, and that's maybe a bit more relevant, is, hey, we're currently in the midst of funding, because working with Bitsing, working with us does cost money. There's a lot of information you can find online, and there's books you can order. My mentor wrote a book about it, which I highly recommend. It was for me one of the eye openers. But in the end, working with me does cost money. So if you're working on funding, maybe we're not the right priority yet. I've had 2 conversations where we agreed, hey, let's talk in a couple of months when you did your funding and there is money and there's actually a lot of growth pressure, because I do see that tech companies, AI companies are within my ICP, as we call it, one of the most important companies, because there's so much growth pressure on them from VC, from angel investors, from private equity, depending on the size. And I speak with guys that they tell me like, hey, we have to grow our revenue with 100% in the coming year. I don't have a plan or a structure necessarily in place to do that. And then Bitsing can be a resolve, but you do need to have the funding for it, obviously.
And do you need CEO buy-in first, or can it start from inside one team?
That's a great question. So let's put it like this. It's not necessarily the first buy-in I need. I also meet with CMOs, I sit down with COOs, I sit down with CROs and whatever else C there is. However, it is in the end important that the entire C-suite, or both founders or managing directors or whatever word you want to put to it, are on board. It can't be the case that one person is like, no, I'm not going to do this, because then the method by itself will fail already from the get-go.
So you talked about the 3 phases: building the plan, elaborating it, and executing it. The guarantee applies when you go all 3. Clients might push back on that: budget, time, impatience.
Yeah.
What does it look like when someone tries to buy just one phase and run with it themselves? And what are the predictable ways that fails?
I can be straight up honest. There are clients that say, hey, let's start with the Bitsing goal plan. And that is perfectly fine. And what we see often is once that plan is there, they're like, actually, I kind of want your help on elaboration. But there are also clients that say, my team understands it so well, it's such a clear plan, we can do it ourselves. So if that is the case, be my guest. I love working with you. I love building a plan. I love helping your team. We'll train your team in how to do it, what tools are, and we'll show them what tools are available to make sure they're doing it properly. So it truly depends on what the client wants. So I'm not going to say, no, we just do a year trajectory. Obviously, that has my preference. But if a client just wants the Bitsing goal plan, that's also perfectly fine. We're not going to say no to that. Like, I just want to help people with the Bitsing plan in whatever form or shape. However, the guaranteed then becomes a bit softer. But I must admit, in all of the conversations I've had so far, the whole guaranteed thing, even though that is something that draws attention, and I still can say it with confidence, is not necessarily something that pops up in the conversation around, hey, we want to work with you. Do we have a guaranteed money back or something like that? I haven't heard it a single time.
I'm curious, you're bringing a methodology built in European corporate contexts, BMW, Shell, KLM, into American startup culture, for at least if I can put it that way, where they tend to move fast, break things, weekly sprints, minimum viable, everything. Bitsing seems to require a different temperament, more sequential, more rigorous. Where has the cultural translation been harder than you expected, and where has it actually been easier?
So that's a great question. So the companies I work with right now, or that I pitch towards, it's a very fast array of companies. So I've spoken with a brewery, I've spoken with 2 AI companies, I've spoken with a tech company, I work with a creative studio. So I spoke with a performance marketing agency. So you see, it's not necessarily that it's just been the tech conversations, but obviously every industry, every specific company has their own needs and has their own limitations as well as their own advantages. With some of the clients I've spoken to, and the clients I'm working with, there hasn't been any issue when it comes to sprints and whatnot. Mostly also because I do the majority of the work. I work with a company right now and they're swamped in work, but in the end, the Bitsing goal plan will take them a day or 2 maximum, whereas to build it for me takes more like a month or so, a month and a half. So it truly depends on the company itself. I wouldn't say I have run into a certain pattern or a certain theme across these companies.
For a B2B tech CEO listening right now, $3 million ARR, growing, but not at the pace they expected, genuinely unsure whether their problem is in sales, marketing, or the product. What do they do in the next 30 days? What's the first thing you'd recommend they look at, and what would tell them they're on the right track?
Yeah, honestly, it's a bit of a boring answer, but a very clear one, is go through the 7 steps of Bitsing. The first thing you do is set 3 financial goals. Make sure your teams are aware of that goal. Then secondly, once you have set those 3 goals and your team is aware, make sure that you start to look at the data. So if we want to achieve this revenue goal and we want to achieve this growth that we set for ourselves, with which pencils are we going to achieve that? What are our most important target groups? What are our most important target product categories? What are the most important regions? That depends obviously on the company you're working with. And then think around, okay, if we know that we have settled for certain continuity pencils, so we know which ones are our bread and butter, how can we create a strategy where we over-index on areas where we do see potential versus our bread and butter? Now, once you have said that, try to think around, okay, now we know what our target group is and we know where to focus on. What is that emotional reason that truly makes our company stand out versus anyone else? And that is a claim that no one else can make. How can we create that longing that we have for Apple? Step 4, and we hadn't really talked about the last 4 principles, but step 4 is around thinking around, okay, what does my funnel look like? And where are the biggest obstacles? Because when we tend to optimize for a funnel, a lot of organizations once again start to act on gut feeling. So they feel like, oh, we have to do SEO optimization, or in this case, maybe nowadays, a ChatGPT or optimization. And they tend to spend a certain amount of dollars on that. But is that truly the thing that is the biggest issue? So what we do at Bitsing, we create a ranking of our life cycle, and we say, what are your biggest obstacles within it? And what is your smallest obstacle? And what we do as well, which is very important, is that once you have acknowledged that certain obstacles require more attention and budget, we don't forget about the obstacles that require less attention and less budget, because you want to optimize everything at the same time. Because if you optimize, let's say, for brand awareness and you optimize for conversion, people might still be stuck at the brand preference step or at traffic. So make sure you optimize sequentially for everything. And you can only do that by creating a ranking with you and your team. And you do that together with your marketing team, with your sales team. And you're going to truly, and maybe your insights team, and you're going to look, okay, what are the biggest issues we have and what are issues that maybe require a bit of less of attention? Because once you do that, you can start to be strategic around where you're going to focus your effort and your marketing on and your sales budgets on. But like I said, it is important that you try to deliver results at everything at the same time. Only the number one problem requires your most attention, the biggest budgets, and so on. And once you do that, there's two more principles left. And those principles kind of tie back to making sure that whatever you do from a marketing or sales perspective ties into your financial budget. So you're gonna calculate, okay, how much should I be spending versus how much do I expect to earn from this? So that you end up with something there. We don't believe in Bitsing at ROI. We don't believe in return on investment. I invested in Bitcoin on January. So far, my return on investment is not great, I promise you. It's like going to the casino, like I explained. No, make sure that you start to understand how much actually every sale is going to deliver to you, so that by the end, you know how much you're investing, and you know that you're not going to invest more than you're actually going to earn on that particular program that you're doing. And if you have questions about that, because this might all sound very hypothetical and a lot, everyone can always reach out to me, whether it's on LinkedIn or via my website. And I gladly take you through an inspiration session so you understand exactly what I'm talking about.
And just curious, Bitsing, is it an acronym for something, or is it just
It is.
the name?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Walk us through the acronym.
Yeah, so when Franz, my mentor, founded the
Yep.
method, he discovered basically what he did with BMW. What he found is the 6 life cycle steps that we believe in and work with. And those 6 steps, we call it BITSER steps. So the B is from brand awareness. The I is from interest. That's the preference I've been talking about. The T is from traffic. The S is from sales. The E is from extra sales. And the R is from referral. Now, when it comes to the act of Bitsing, why it's Bitsing and not Bitsering is simply because Bitsing just sounds better. But it is a continuous activity that we are engaged in, and hence it's called Bitsing.
And the core claim of Bitsing is that growth can be predicted, sequenced, and guaranteed, that it
Yes.
doesn't have to be mysterious or accidental. If
Yeah.
that's true, why have so many companies encountered, so I should say, or why have so few companies encountered this in 33 years? What's been the barrier to adoption? And is something different happening now that makes this the right moment?
Yeah, when it comes to Bitsing as a methodology and the application of it, the last 33 years it's been Franz by himself. So he was a freelance strategist, so to say, or the word we don't like to use, consultant. And he did a certain number of jobs a year based on the capacity he had. And that was about it. But he had no, in that sense, no aspiration to make it into something like obviously it has transcended across from him, but he had no ambition to turn it into a full-fledged company, basically. And what has changed now, and is that Franz is going slowly with retirement, and he's still the godfather of everything, and he's looking at everything, and he's very involved. But there is now a new group of individuals, including myself, in New York. But there's also actually talks of opening up a chapter, I think, in Melbourne, if I'm not mistaken. They opened up in Cape Town. They're talking with someone in Singapore. There is a new CEO in the Netherlands. So there is a new group of individuals that actually do have the ambition to transform Bitsing from a one-man army into a actual company and a methodology that is worldwide known by entrepreneurs.
Okay, fine. And what do you want a founder listening to this episode to walk away with from this conversation, having changed in how they think?
I think what I would love, and that's the same goal as I want with an inspiration session. What I always say when I do an inspiration session, I don't necessarily want or expect you to become my client when I host a session. What I want is that you walk away and you will think about certain decisions you have been making with your team around how to do business. Let's take the golden egg as an example. and that you walk away and you think, man, Hugo has a point. I should be reconsidering some of the way we position our brand. And there's another couple of theories or methodologies we even haven't discussed today. And once I start to bring that to the table, people walk away and they're just like, for example, I will give you one simple example, which we haven't discussed. At Bitsing, we say when you want to create extra sales, so someone has been a client of yours and we use a dating analogy for it, we can't be talking about sales. We only talk about the extras. Why is that? If I would ask someone that's in a relationship for 30 years and is loyal and happy and faithful, why they are in that relationship for so long and why they are so happy, loyal and faithful, they won't tell you it's because of the transactions. We call it the kissing that constantly happens. No, they will tell you because this person has amazing extras. They give back rubs, they give breakfast on bed, they have great jokes, they have a fantastic family, and so on. So if you think about as a brand, how you create loyalty, it's not about constantly talking about extra sales, which annoyingly, if you buy any product or any service on earth at this point, a week later you will get an email and they ask you, hey, you want to buy more? The world doesn't work like that. So we say if you want to create loyalty and you want to generate extra sales, talk about the extras you have to offer. And very importantly, those extras should be unconditional. So you can't talk about extras and expect something back. And that's why 90% of the loyalty programs, and for example, every credit card program is flawed because you only get extras if you spend more. But we say at Bitsing, if a reward is conditional, the loyalty is conditional. If Amex calls me today and asks me to cut my Chase card in half and for a reward of 500,000 points, I'll be running towards my drawer right now and grab a scissors, right? So it's conditional loyalty. So how do we create unconditional loyalty? By unconditional rewards. And if we provide those rewards, those unconditional extras, sales automatically will come. If you are in a long-lasting relationship for 30 years and you talk about those extras, we can assume that there has been some kissing that has happened, but it's the effect, not the cause. Now, that is the part of the analogy that I give, and why I'm saying that is like, I want people to walk away thinking differently about, okay, actually, what do we do to retain people? How do we manage churn, right? And often you will see they will talk about product. Another example that showcases how weird it is that we think about these things is the birthday coupon. So any brand on earth will give you a birthday coupon. And they will tell you, if it's your birthday, you get a 10% discount. Come to our site. Congratulations. But if you would invite me to your birthday and I have a shop next to your house and I would give you a 10% discount coupon on my own store, you would probably think it's the lousiest birthday gift on earth. Right? So think about those things. Think about the things we have discussed today and retrace the steps that you normally tend to make without really pondering over it anymore because it has become business as usual. Because once you start to think about those things, there's actually a lot of things probably that you can change even without my help or even without working with me.
Just to be clear, and I may have missed this myself, but what exactly would an inspiration session cover?
Yes, it's a 60-minute session that I do for free. I always make the joke, I'm going to conquer the world one inspiration session at a time. I just need people to believe in Bitsing and understand it, and then automatically I believe sales will come. But it's not a, like I said, I don't expect it after an inspiration session. I just want to help you to be inspired. And what it entails is a conversation of 60 minutes. And I specifically say conversation. It's not a presentation. It's not a monologue. It's a dialogue. And we will talk through the lens of Bitsing and those 7 principles. And we discussed a couple of them, and some of them we haven't really discussed in this call. But we will talk about your company, the growth obstacles you're facing, things that are going well. And we talk about your sales funnel, about your brand positioning. And we kind of talk about it through the lens of what we believe at Bitsing through those 7 principles should be the case. And what you tend to see that sometimes things are going really well, and sometimes there's friction. And then we're going to talk about the friction and what that means for you and how you can kind of remove that friction, for example, from your sales funnel. So in those 60 minutes, we'll analyze your company together and we'll analyze it through the lens of the 7 principles that the Bitsing methodology entails.
Right. Hugo, this has been genuinely a different conversation. Thank you for going deep on this. For anyone who wants to learn more, explore an inspiration session, or find yourself, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, it's fairly simple, fortunately. So we either go to bitsing.com, which is bitsing.com, and you can find more information there. There's also a portal where you can book an inspiration session directly in my calendar. Or if you're interested in just a chat or you want to follow my journey, I post a lot about Bitsing as well. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and I'm not going to spell my name because it's a very long Dutch name, but I'm pretty sure we can manage that in the chat, the comment, or the title.
Yes, we'll put links to that in the show notes as well. People can find the link there. Hugo, thanks again so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was a super fun conversation. Thank you for giving me the platform and thank you for the in-depth questions. I really enjoyed answering them. And I hope you are a little bit inspired as well.
Certainly am.